So, have you ever really thought about the shape of history? I mean, we all have this mental picture, right? A straight line, just marching neatly from the past to the present. But what if that's not just an oversimplification? What if it's completely wrong? Today, we're going to dig into a really radical idea, that history isn't a line at all, but a dynamic, living field.
Okay, let's break this down. Over on the left, you've got your classic timeline. It's a simple one-way street. But on the right, that's this new idea. History as a field. Imagine it's like a giant piece of fabric. It's pliable, you know? It can be folded, so 2 points in time that seem super far apart can suddenly touch each other. And just like fabric, it can also be torn by major traumas or get all knotted up by these complex legacies that are just so hard to untangle.
And here's where it gets really mind-bending. When you think of history as a field, it completely changes what close even means. An event isn't just close to what happened yesterday. For example, a social justice movement that's happening right now might actually have way more in common, a similar energy, a similar structure, with a peasant revolt from the Middle Ages than it does with yesterday's stock market report. They resonate, they connect across centuries, even if they're nowhere near each other on a simple timeline.
So if we're going to treat history like this wild landscape with its own peaks and valleys and fault lines, then we need some new tools to map it, right? We need a way to talk about the hidden forces that shaped the whole thing and a way to describe the scars that it leaves behind. And that's exactly what we're going to do next.
Our first tool has a fancy name, a historiotome. I know, it sounds a little academic, but the idea is actually super simple. Just think of it as a historical pressure cooker. It's a specific moment in a specific place, like, say, Renaissance Florence or Silicon Valley back in the 70s, where all these social, technological, and cultural forces get squeezed together, building up this immense pressure. And then, boom, they create explosive, world-altering change.
Now, if a historiotome is where all that pressure builds up and history crystallizes, our next tool, historiopathy, is about what happens when that fabric of history actually tears. This is basically like giving a diagnosis for a historical illness. It's the scar that gets left behind by a really deep trauma, a wound like a genocide or the lasting legacy of slavery that just damages the field for generations and generations to come.
All right, theory is great, but let's actually put these tools to work and see how they function in the real world. We're going to zoom in on one of the most violently transformative periods in all of human history, the first half of the 16th century. This was a time when the entire globe was fundamentally and forever rewired. You can see this devastating chain reaction, this cascade, laid out so clearly. It all kicks off with that initial transoceanic contact. But that almost immediately leads to a massive pathogen shock. You have old world diseases just wiping out entire populations. Well, what does that create? A catastrophic labor shortage. And the brutal solution to that? Coerced labor, which leads directly to the establishment of the plantation system. And the whole thing is financed by these huge flows of silver from the Americas, which in turn completely rewires the entire global economy. It's just one tragic domino falling after another.
The really key thing to understand here is that these historiotomes, these pressure cookers, were an absolute double-edged sword. They were both engines of incredible change and the sources of these deep, deep wounds. So you see the Atlantic Silver Conduit? Yeah, it financed massive empires, but it also completely destabilized economies. The Conquest plantation system created unimaginable wealth, but at the cost of demographic collapse and cultural erasure. It's this two-sided nature that makes them so incredibly powerful and so destructive.
But, these massive historical structures, they aren't just abstract ideas on a chart. They're felt. They leave behind an atmosphere, a kind of presence that still lingers in our world today. It's almost like a scent left behind by the past.
And believe it or not, there's a perfect word for this, borrowed from French, sillage. It originally means the scent that hangs in the air after someone wearing perfume has just walked by. But in this context, it's the lingering wake of history. It's that atmosphere of a place, that emotional residue of an event that you can still feel in the air long, long after it's over.
And this sillage, it's not just one thing. It comes in all these different forms. You've got affective sillage. That's the emotional stuff, the collective trauma or even nostalgia. Then there's material sillage, the actual physical traces, like the patina on an old ruin. And then there's negative sillage, that toxic, repellent memory of an atrocity that just haunts a place.
So what does this all mean for us, right here, right now? Well, it means we are all breathing the air of the past. We're living inside the sillage of decisions that were made and traumas that were inflicted centuries ago, whether we're conscious of it or not. History isn't just something back there that we study. It is the very atmosphere that we inhabit every single day.
And that brings us to maybe the most important question of all. If we can diagnose these historical wounds, these tears in the fabric of time, is there any way to actually heal them?
Because the whole point of this new way of thinking isn't just to analyze the past, it's to move from diagnosis to therapy. So we've talked about historiopathy. That's the diagnosis of the illness, right? The naming of the trauma, the alienation. But on the other side of the coin, you have historiotherapeusis. I know, it's another long word. But all it means is the active work of healing. Things like reinterpreting those old, damaging stories, repairing broken connections, and the incredibly powerful act of remembrance. Now, let's be clear. This isn't about changing the past. We can't do that. It's about changing how its legacy affects us today. So what does this restitching actually look like? Well, it can be really concrete actions like recovering suppressed historical records or creating new maps of territories that were erased, or even legal reparations. These are all real things aimed at trying to mend those tears in the fabric of history.
And so this whole idea leaves us with a final, really crucial question. If history is this field we're all living on, and if our actions today create the silage for the future, what's the atmosphere that our time is creating? What knots are we tying right now? What tears are we making? And how will the scent of our present moment be felt by the generations who come after us?